Hey there, Wide Awake Horror family. Thanks for tuning in. If you're part of the family, then you're a legend. However, over 90% of you aren't subscribed. So please take this time to smash that sub button and hit that like button to lock it in. We really appreciate each and every one of you guys. One last thing. Leave a comment on where you're listening from. I would really love to interact with my fellow supporters. Comment down a hello too, and we will respond. Your support helps these stories reach new viewers and grows our family even more. I was already regretting saying yes before the appetizers hit the table. I met Jason through one of those dating apps that tries too hard to act like a personality quiz. He seemed normal in messages. He used a lot of emojis, which annoyed me, but I figured it was better than one-word answers. His profile said he liked hiking and was all about deep convos, which sounded decent at the time. And I hadn't been on a date in months, so I kind of talked myself into being excited. We met at this Italian place downtown that looked fancier online than it did in person. I got there a bit early, mostly because I didn't want to do that awkward thing where you're trying to spot each other while pretending you're not looking for anyone. He walked in 5 minutes late, wearing a suit jacket that looked borrowed and jeans that didn't match. He smiled like he knew something I didn't and gave me this weird side hug like we were coworkers. I was halfway through reaching for the menu when he just took it out of my hands. I laughed at first because I thought he was joking, but he just folded it shut and set it aside. Then he waved the waiter over and said, "We'll both have the veal parm and a bottle of red, something Italian." I sat there frozen for a second trying to figure out if this was some kind of prank. When the waiter left, he leaned in and said something like, "Win and love it, my guy takes charge." That was the moment I realized I was in for a very long evening. I tried steering the convo to something light, music, weekend plans, literally anything else, but he was already launching into a full-blown TE talk about how society's been flipped upside down since the 60s. He said something about how men are being silenced and how feminism was never about equality, just revenge. I thought maybe if I just let him run out of steam, I could ride it out until dessert and leave quietly. But nope, he was just getting started. He went on and on about how he reads a lot of independent thinkers, which I found out later meant Reddit threads and one very questionable podcast. He said women shouldn't vote because they vote with their feelings, and that's why everything's so divided now. He looked proud when he said it, like he expected me to thank him for the insight. I just stared at him. It was like watching someone try to mansplain the entire 20th century through a YouTube comment section. The table next to us was giving me these little looks. You know, the kind, sympathetic, like they knew I was trapped but couldn't do anything. I started sipping the wine just to have something to do, and Jason kept pouring more every time my glass got low, like he thought he was doing me a favor. The food showed up, and I didn't even want it anymore. It smelled good, sure, but I was too busy trying not to imagine flipping the plate into his lap and walking out. Halfway through dinner, he asked if I wanted to go back to his place and watch some Jordan Peterson clips together, and I had to pretend to laugh just to keep from saying something that would start a scene. I said I had an early morning and pulled the classic might have to cut things short line. He looked disappointed but tried to save it by saying he respected that I had discipline, which made me want to crawl under the table and disappear. We waited for the check in silence. He still paid, which surprised me, but not before saying something like, "I don't believe in splitting the bill. Some things should stay traditional." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. The walk out of the restaurant was the longest part. He tried to hold my hand, and I pretended to adjust my bag. At the curb, he leaned in for a hug, and I gave him the kind of quick one-arm thing you give a dentist you never want to see again. He said, "Let's do this again soon," and I mumbled something like, "Yeah, maybe," before bolting in the other direction. When I got home, I blocked him before I even took my shoes off. I still think about that date sometimes, not in a dramatic way, just like a weird story you tell your friends when you need a good laugh. Every part of it felt like a parody, like someone dared him to be that awful. But no, that was just him. Jason, the guy who thinks voting is too emotional for women and ordering someone else's food is chivalry. Honestly, if someone made a fake profile just to troll the world, he'd be a blueprint. It's wild how many red flags you can ignore in the first 15 minutes because your brain doesn't want to believe someone can be that confident and that wrong at the same time. But here's the thing, some people aren't even trying to hide it. They say it all right out loud, clear as day, like it's the smartest thing you've ever heard. And you just sit there, holding a fork, wondering how fast you can eat your overpriced veal without choking so you can leave without making a scene. Anyway, lesson learned. No more dates with guys who call themselves truth seekers. That's code for a lot of things, and none of them are good. I wasn't even supposed to go out that night. My roommate had been pushing me to put myself out there because apparently staying in and eating pad thai while watching old cooking competitions wasn't what she called a healthy routine. So when I matched with Emily, who looked cute and had this bio about being a single mom and loving books, I figured, all right, why not? It felt like a small step back into dating without being too intense. We agreed to meet at this little diner near my place. Chill spot, not too loud. Seemed like a safe bet. I got there 5 minutes early and ordered a coffee just to kill time. Place smelled like waffles and bacon, so I started feeling a little optimistic. I was scrolling through my phone when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around expecting Emily, and she was there, except she wasn't alone. She had a toddler on her hip, squirming and rubbing his eyes like he'd just woken up from a nap he didn't agree to. I blinked and tried to hide whatever face I made. She gave me this big smile and said something like, I hope it's okay I brought him, the sitter veiled. I didn't know what to say. I'd literally never been around kids before, especially not during a first date. But she looked tired, like really tired, and I didn't have the heart to say anything. I just nodded and said, yeah, of course, no problem, even though I knew this was already spiraling. We sat down in a booth and the kid, her son Milo, immediately started banging a spoon on the table like it was a drum solo. Emily pulled out a tablet from her bag and set it in front of him without saying much. He calmed down a little, staring at some loud cartoon that kept repeating the same song about cleaning up toys. I tried to focus on Emily, but honestly, I was already kind of thrown. She started talking to Milo a minute. Something about her ex, how he was unreliable, how being a single parent wasn't what she'd planned, and how she usually doesn't date but felt like she deserved something for herself for once. I nodded and made small talk, but it felt weird, like I was part of someone else's therapy session. The whole time, the kid kept swinging between laughing at the tablet and dropping food on the floor. I couldn't tell if we were supposed to be having a date or if I'd been brought in as some kind of emotional support adult. We hadn't even ordered yet when she suddenly said she needed to take a call. She gave me a quick just a sec and got a phone already at her ear. I thought she'd be back in a few minutes. The waiter came by and I stalled, saying we were still deciding. Then I looked over and saw her outside on the sidewalk, pacing, phone pressed to her head, free hand waving like she was arguing with someone. So I waited and waited. The kid started getting restless. He looked up at me and said something I couldn't make out, then tried to crawl under the table. I tried asking him to stay seated, but he just gave me this blank look like I didn't exist. He started whining, then crying, loud crying. The kind that turns heads. People at the next table gave me these weird glances, probably thinking I was his dad or something. I just awkwardly smiled and tried to get him to focus back on the tablet, but it had gone dark and I didn't know the passcode. After 10 minutes, I started checking my phone. After 15, I got up to peek outside. She was still out there, still on the phone, now sitting on the curb and crying. I couldn't hear much, but it didn't look like she was coming back in any time soon. I went back to the table. The kid was now trying to pour salt into his juice. I gently moved it away, and he threw the juice cup on the floor. It exploded like a grenade. The waiter came by and looked at me like I was the problem. I apologized, tried to clean it up with napkins, but the damage was done. I was officially the adult in charge, and I was not prepared. 25 minutes passed. She finally came back in, looking like she'd just walked through a wind tunnel. She said, sorry, that was my ex, it got complicated. Then she sat down and started scrolling through her phone like we hit pause and were picking things up again. No apology. No, thanks for watching my kid. Nothing. She just picked up the menu and started asking if I liked pancakes. I said I had to leave. I didn't even try to fake an excuse. Just straight up told her I didn't think I was the right guy for this. She blinked at me like she hadn't expected that, then said, wow, okay, and went back to her phone. I dropped a 10 on the table even though we didn't order anything and walked out. As I left, I saw the tablet light up again and the kid laughing like nothing ever happened. I had just kept walking. On the way home, I kept thinking about how weird the whole thing felt, like I was drafted into a situation without being asked. I get that things happen, life's messy, and parenting is hard. But bringing your kid to a first date and then disappearing for half an hour without a word, that's not messy, that's just inconsiderate. I didn't sign up to be a babysitter. I didn't even get a waffle out of it. I never heard from her again. She unmatched me the next day, probably realized it hadn't gone the way she wanted, or maybe she just didn't want to deal with explaining herself. The weird part, I wasn't even mad. I was mostly confused. Like, what exactly did she think was going to happen? That we'd bond over spilled juice and co-parenting stress. That I'd prove myself by surviving a trial by toddler. I don't know. All I know is the next time someone says they're spontaneous or go with the flow, I'm gonna ask if that flow includes diapers and Disney soundtracks, just in case. There's something weird about seeing someone in person after talking to them for weeks online. You build this version of them in your head, kind of like assembling a character in a game, piece by piece, funny messages, their music taste, the way they type lol instead of ha, and then suddenly you're standing face to face with them, and it doesn't feel like the same person at all. And that's how it was with Kevin. He looked like his picture, sure. Taller than I expected, decent hair, decent smile. But from the moment he opened his mouth, something felt off. We met at this bar he picked, trendy spot with the kind of lighting that makes everyone look a little bit better than they actually are. I didn't love it, too loud and too full of those people who seem to go out just to take pictures proving they went out. But I went with it because Kevin seemed really chill when we were texting. He liked indie films, said he worked in finance but wanted to get into something more meaningful. He even asked me real questions, not just the usual wide kind of stuff. The first weird moment came pretty early. We sat down, and before I could even open the menu, he said, "I'll make this easy," and waved the waiter over. He ordered a drink for himself and then looked at me and said, "You'll love the lavender gin fizz, trust me." Then he handed the menus back before I even saw mine. I thought maybe he was trying to be suave or whatever, but it felt more like he was trying to steer the whole thing from the jump. I didn't say anything, just kind of went along with it, but I made a mental note. Drinks came, I'll admit it was actually good, but I was still thrown. I asked about his day, something simple to get the ball rolling, and he kind of smirked and said, "It's been a ride." Then, without any build-up, he started talking about his wife. Not ex-wife, wife. At first, I thought I misheard him, but nope, he said it again like it was no big deal. My wife and I, well, we're kind of figuring things out, he said, like it was some boring thing he had to do after work. He explained that they were technically still together, but things had been emotionally over for a while, and that he just needed to feel alive again. I didn't even know what to say. I think I laughed a little because I thought maybe he was joking, but he kept going. He told me they sleep in separate rooms now, that they don't even eat dinner together, and that she knows he's out meeting people. Then he dropped this gem. It's not cheating if you're already broken. The thing is, he was so calm about it. Like he wasn't sitting across from a stranger he tricked into a date. I actually thanked him for being honest. He said it like he expected me to understand, maybe even admire him for being bold enough to admit it. Meanwhile, I'd sitting there trying to figure out how to disappear without physically leaving my body. And it wasn't just that he was still married. It was the way he talked about her. Like she was this old shirt he used to love, but didn't fit into anymore. He said things like, "We just grew into different people, and she's more of a mother figure now than a partner." I kept thinking, if this is how he talks about someone he spent a decade with, what's he gonna say about me when I don't text back fast enough? I finished my drink fast, and he offered to get another round. I said I was good. He leaned back and gave me this look like I was being uptight, like I was supposed to be cool about all of it. He even said something about how people are too binary these days. Either you're single or you're not, and there's no room for the in between. I wanted to say that no, actually. If you're married, you're married. There's no gray area there. But I kept it to myself because I didn't feel like getting into some philosophical debate about commitment over overpriced cocktails. Then he pulled out his phone. I thought maybe he was checking the time, but no. He opened his photos and started showing me pictures of his wedding. like full-on ceremony shots. Him in a tux, her in a white dress, smiling like she hadn't yet realized she married a guy who'd someday show those pictures to strangers on first dates. He said, "It was beautiful, wasn't it?" It looked at me like I was supposed to compliment. I couldn't even answer. My brain just stalled. After that, I was done. I said I had to get up early and started grabbing my bag. He looked surprised. Said he thought we were having a good time. I said, I didn't know this was a date with a married man. And he kind of scoffed and muttered something about how I'd probably been the other woman before and just didn't admit it. That part stuck with me. Not because it was true, but because it showed exactly who he was. I walked out of the bar and texted my roommate the word disaster. She called me instantly, and I told her everything in the walk home. We laughed about it later, but even now, weeks later, I still think about how casual he was. How completely okay he was with lying, or maybe worse, not even thinking it was lying. Like the only thing that mattered was how he felt in that moment. Like his boredom gave him the right to drag someone else into his mess. That night, I deleted the app. Not forever, just for a while. It wasn't even about Kevin, really. It was about how easy it is for people to treat each other like distractions instead of people. He wasn't looking for someone new. He was looking for someone to pretend he wasn't still stuck. And I'm not trying to be that person for anybody. Not now, not ever. There's this weird moment on every first date where you both kind of pause and silently decide if you're into it or not. It happens somewhere between ordering drinks and the first bite of food. You can feel it. The spark or the total absence of one. With Nicole, that moment never really came. Not because I didn't notice it, but because she came in like she already decided we were perfect and all I had to do was realize it. We met at this sushi place just off a busy strip, the kind that tries to look minimalist but ends up feeling like a very quiet cafeteria. I picked it because I figured sushi was a safe bet, casual, not too heavy, and no weird waiting times. She was already sitting when I arrived, all polished up and scrolling through her phone like she was running a business. She smiled when she saw me, but it was more like a check mark got crossed off than anything warm. From the jump, I noticed she was intense. Not in a bad way at first. Confident, correct. I don't mind that. It was actually kind of refreshing after a string of dates where people just stared at their phones and mumbled through awkward small talk. She leaned in fast, asking a ton of questions. Not the fun kind like, what's your favorite movie? More like job title, income range, how many siblings I rent or own. It felt like I was filling out a dating tax form. When I asked her what she did for work, she said something vague about tech recruiting, but then added, I already looked you up, by the way. I laughed, thinking she meant the usual harmless creeping everyone does, but she just kept going. She said she found my LinkedIn, saw my job history, and figured out roughly what I made based on company salary averages. Then she said, you're in a good bracket. That's important. I froze for a second. I honestly didn't know how to respond. It wasn't just that she looked me up. Lots of people do that. But the way she said it, like it was part of some vetting process. She wasn't embarrassed or even trying to play it off. She said it like she was complimenting me, like she expected me to be proud. I took a sip of water and tried to shift gears. I asked her about her hobbies, what she liked to do outside of work, but she just smiled and said, that stuff changes, but stability doesn't. Then she went on this rant about how she's done dating people who don't have a plan, and how she's been through too many situationships with guys who were just coasting. She said, at our age, it's not about chemistry, it's about compatibility, and I swear, she said the word assets twice in the same sentence. She hadn't touched her drink. I'd barely touched mine. I remember looking around the restaurant and seeing other couples laughing, leaning into each other, actually enjoying themselves. Meanwhile, Nicole was treating this like an interview panel and I was failing the vibe test. I felt myself slipping into that autopilot mode, nodding and smiling while trying to decide how soon was too soon to end it. Then she hit me with it. She said she could see this going somewhere, that she's good at reading people, and that I seemed like someone who would be loyal. It wasn't a compliment. It felt more like a forecast, like she was trying to convince herself that the puzzle pieces would fit if she just forced them hard enough. Then she said, and I'll never forget this, you're the kind of guy I'd want raising kids with me. Not exciting, but dependable. That's when I checked out completely, like my soul physically left the table. I'm not saying I need fireworks on a first date, but I at least like to feel like a person and not an item on a spreadsheet. Everything about the night felt transactional, like I was being evaluated for a position in her 5-year plan, and she just wanted to make sure my background check cleared. I tried wrapping it up by saying I had an early morning, which was true, but also not the point. She looked surprised, like the idea that I wasn't totally on board hadn't even crossed her mind. She asked if I wanted to walk a bit afterward, maybe grab dessert at a place nearby. I said no, and her face didn't really change, just kind of reset, like she was mentally adjusting her calendar. We split the bill. I paid for my stuff, she paid for hers, and then we stood outside for a second that felt way too long. She said, "Well, this was productive," and I didn't know if she was joking or not. I just gave a half smile and said something like, "Yeah, take care," before turning toward the parking lot. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about how weird it was that someone could seem so normal online and then be so clinical in person. She wasn't rude or mean, just mechanical, like she'd already built the relationship in her head and was just waiting for the right guy to plug into it. She didn't want to get to know me. She wanted confirmation that I fit. I never texted her again. She didn't text me either. I think we both knew we weren't gonna get what we wanted. Or maybe she was already on to the next profile, comparing credit scores and future zip codes. I get that people date with intention, that everyone's looking for different things. But there's a difference between looking for a partner and shopping for one. With Nicole, it felt like I wasn't a person. I was a checklist, a decent resume, a number with a personality stable to it. And I'm sorry, but I'm not building a life with someone who thinks productive is a good way to describe a night out. I don't usually say yes to dates that start with, "Trust me, you'll love this place." It always sounds like someone's trying too hard to prove they got good taste. But Matt was funny, and we'd been talking for a couple weeks, and I figured it wouldn't hurt to go along with it. He said he had a spot in mind, didn't give me the name, just an address, and told me to wear something casual, but not too casual, which made no sense, but whatever. I went with jeans and a decent top and called it a safe middle. The place turned out to be a little steakhouse tucked between two office buildings. Not fancy, but clearly trying to be. Lots of leather booths, dim lighting, fake candles on every table. I walked in and saw Matt already talking to a waiter like they were friends. He waved me over with that big grin people use when they think they've nailed something. Right away he said, "This is my spot. I used to work here." I said something like, "Oh, that's cool," figuring he meant years ago, maybe high school job or something. But then he added, "Still technically on the roster." That's when I found out he was a part-time server there. I didn't care about that at all. Honestly, I've worked enough customer service jobs to respect anyone who can deal with it. But he seemed weirdly proud, like he expected a reaction. We sat down, and he told me not to worry about ordering. He said he had it all covered and gave a low wink. I laughed a bit trying to go along with it, even though I hadn't even looked at the menu. He called over a waiter, leaned in, and said something low I couldn't hear, and the waiter gave him a half nod like he heard it before. Then Matt leaned back and said, "We're getting the best stuff off menu." I didn't ask questions. I probably should have. While we waited, he started telling me about this secret diner program the restaurant supposedly had. He said they sometimes send people in to test service quality, food timing, cleanliness, the whole deal. He told me he'd done it before and that tonight. We pretend I was his guest while he secretly reviewed the staff. He even pulled out a notebook from his jacket. I thought he was joking. I laughed. He wasn't joking. He said we needed to be really observant. Watch how long the food took, how the drinks were poured, whether the silverware was clean. I asked him who this was for, and he just said the manager. I asked if the manager asterisk knew asterisk he was doing this, and he said, "Well, not officially, but they'll thank me later." That's when I realized this wasn't some restaurant program. Matt had made it up. The food came. 2 big steaks, sides, drinks, the whole thing. I hadn't ordered any of it. He told me he knew I didn't eat red meat, which I'd never actually said, but figured tonight could be an exception. I took 2 bites just to be polite. It was fine, nothing special. He, on the other hand, was making a show of everything. Holding the fork like a critic, swirling his drink before each sip, writing things down in his notebook every few minutes. He kept mumbling things like presentation could be tighter and service lacks warmth. I started feeling secondhand embarrassment. The staff clearly knew who he was, and not in a good way. They kept giving each other looks when they passed our table, like they were waiting for something to go wrong. One of them dropped off a bread basket without making eye contact. Another one picked up our empty plates like they were trying not to roll their eyes. I don't blame them. Then came the bill. Matt picked it up, studied it, and frowned. He started muttering about how they charged for things that should have been comped. I assumed he meant the off-menu stuff, maybe a drink or two, so I waited while he flagged down the waiter. He said something about being a loyal staff member, and how these meals are meant to test the system, whatever that meant. The waiter stood there, confused and clearly annoyed. Then Matt asked to speak to the manager. The manager came over, and Matt launched into this long speech about how the whole dinner was part of an internal evaluation, and how he kept detailed notes on every part of the service. He flipped open his notebook like it was an official report. The manager stared at him for a full 5 seconds, then said, "You don't work here anymore, Matt. You haven't in over a year. You can't just come in and run fake inspections." I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me. Matt looked stunned, like he genuinely thought they'd be grateful. He mumbled something about improving operations, and then asked if the meal was going to be comped or not. The manager just shook his head and walked away. The waiter brought the check back, full price, and Matt looked at me and said, "You don't happen to have cash, do you?" I said nope. I didn't even fake dig through my bag. He sighed, pulled out a card, and paid, still looking confused, like the whole thing didn't make sense. As we left, he kept ranting about how the place had gone downhill, how they used to respect insight, and how maybe he should send his notes directly to corporate. I didn't say much. I was too busy replaying the whole thing in my head and wondering how I'd ended up stuck in someone else's delusion. Outside, he tried to end the night with a hug and asked if I wanted to grab drinks at a bar nearby. I said I had an early morning and walked in the opposite direction before he could say anything else. That night I texted my friend. He pretended to be a secret diner and got rejected by his own ex-manager. She sent back 10 laughing emojis and then asked if I was making it up, at which I had been. Matt messaged me the next day saying he had a great time and that we made a good team. I didn't reply. I didn't block him either. I wanted him to see that silence. Let it echo. I don't care how good someone's smile is or how funny they are in texts. If their idea of a good time is impersonating an employee and trying to scam a free steak, we're not gonna work out. I didn't sign up for dinner and a performance. I just wanted a conversation, a laugh or two, maybe some tempura. Instead, I got dragged into a fake job review and watched a grown man get denied by a guy named Steve in Cactus. Definitely not a good team. Some dates go bad in slow motion. You watch them fall apart piece by piece, like a tower tipping over, but taking its sweet time. Others hit the wall immediately. This one was more like a car crash 5 seconds into the drive. From the second Olivia sat down across from me, I knew something was off. She looked great, don't get me wrong. Put together, confident, kind of intense in a way that felt like she could take over a meeting or a courtroom without blinking. But within minutes, it was clear we weren't on the same page, not even the same book. We met at this vegan cafe she picked out, which was fine by me. I'm not vegan, but I'll eat anything once. The place was bright and minimal with plants hanging from the ceiling and weird jazz playing over the speakers. She was already at the table when I got there, sipping a matcha latte with both hands like she was meditating. I gave a small wave as she smiled, and I sat down thinking, all right, let's see where this goes. It started normal enough. Small talk, how was your day, what kind of music do you like? She told me she just finished a session with her therapist, and I nodded like, cool, we're going deep early. I said something about how I think therapy's helpful, and how I'd gone a couple times after a rough breakup. I expected a little yeah, totally, or maybe a story about a good or bad therapist. Instead, she looked straight at me and said, "You don't actually believe in that stuff, do you?" I thought I misheard her. I said, "Therapy," and she nodded, dead serious. She leaned forward and said therapy was a scam made up to sell people on their own problems. I just kind of blinked at her. She said people use mental health as a badge now, like everyone wants to be special or damaged or something. Then she added that depression is just a lack of discipline, that anxiety is what happens when you let your mind get lazy. I didn't know where to even start with that. I'd had a full-on panic attack 2 years ago that landed me in urgent care. And now this girl I barely knew was telling me it was basically my fault for not doing enough yoga or something. I took a deep breath and said, "Well, I think it's a little more complicated than that." She smiled like she was humoring a kid who believed in Santa and said, "I used to think that too." Then I realized it's all just made up labels. She talked a lot, not just about mental health, but about how society makes people weak, how everyone's obsessed with being offended, and how she doesn't believe in emotional support animals because if you need a dog to get through the day, maybe you're not built for adult life. I sat there with my iced tea slowly melting, wondering how I could politely fake an emergency. It didn't help that I already told her I didn't drive there and had walked from my apartment. No quick escape. At one point, I tried steering the conversation to lighter stuff. I brought up music, asked her what she was into. She said she doesn't really consume media anymore because it's full of toxic messaging. Then she added that she only listens to audiobooks written by Stoic philosophers and people who have actually done things. No movies, no TV, no social media. I asked if she ever just relaxes, like watches something dumb or laughs at stupid memes. She looked at me like I'd asked if she kicks puppies. She said, numbing yourself with content is why people are so emotionally unstable. They've never sat with their own minds for 5 minutes without distraction. I nodded slowly, trying not to lose it. She said it like a monk, but with the energy of someone who argues in comment sections for fun. Then she get me with a big one. She asked if I'd ever been on antidepressants. I hesitated, then said yeah, for a while. She didn't blink, just said, that stuff messes with your brain. You're not really yourself when you're on it. She went on to say how people don't need pills. They need structure, discipline, and to stop making excuses. I wasn't even mad at that point, just kind of stunned. I'd never had someone say stuff like that to my face, especially not someone who was supposed to be getting to know me. I didn't want to start a fight, so I said I had a different perspective, and that medication had helped me when I really needed it. She shrugged and said, "That's what they all say." Then they wonder why they still feel broken. It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said it. So sure, so smug, like she was delivering a hard truth I should be grateful for. I checked the time and said I needed to head out soon. She looked surprised, like she thought we were vibing. She even asked if I wanted to do a walk after, maybe grab a juice from a place nearby. I said I had to take care of something at home, which was technically true. I needed to decompress and maybe scream into a pillow. She paid for her own drink and told me she enjoyed the talk. I gave a polite smile and said, "Yeah, thanks for meeting up," and then walked off pretending I had a phone call. I didn't look back. When I got home, I laid down on the couch and just stared at the ceiling for a bit. It wasn't even about disagreeing with her. People can have different views, that's normal. But she wasn't looking for a conversation. She was on mission. She wanted someone to nod along while she delivered her version of the truth like a sermon. It made me think about how many people are out there walking around with these harsh ideas, convinced they've got the world figured out, convinced everyone else just isn't trying hard enough. I guess I was the unlucky one who got matched with one of them. I deleted her number that night and didn't look back. I'm sure she's out there somewhere, listening to Marcus Aurelius on double speed and judging strangers who cry during movies. Good for her, I guess. But I'll keep my feelings, my playlists, and my emotional support memes, thanks. I thought it was gonna be one of those cute, unexpected first dates you remember for the good kind of weird. The kind where you go somewhere unusual, get caught in the rain, and end up laughing about it years later. I didn't expect to be sitting in the passenger seat of a guy's car on the way to what turned out to be a literal cabin in the woods, wondering if this was how people ended up in documentaries. Tyler was someone I matched with on a whim. He was outdoorsy, clearly into fitness, and his pictures were all like mountain hikes and sunrise shots. I'm more of a coffee and comfy sweater person than a hiking boots type, but we joked around a lot and he didn't take himself too seriously, which is rare enough to pay attention to. He suggested we go for a drive and find somewhere cool to hang out. I figured it was just code for a chill spot to grab food or sit by a lake. I said sure, expecting something like a local lookout or maybe a food truck park. He picked me up right on time. Big smile, truck smelled like pine and too much cologne. He seemed normal, but a little overhyped. I asked where we were going and he said, It's a surprise, you'll love it, and that should have been a red flag. But I'd already gotten in the car and we were moving before I had a chance to really think about it. At first, the drive was fine. He played some indie band I've never heard of and talked about how he was trying to disconnect more from the world, which sounded harmless enough. But then we started getting farther and farther away from anything that looked familiar. Houses started disappearing. Trees got thicker. I kept glancing out the window and realizing I couldn't see any streetlights anymore. Just long, winding roads and trees that all looked the same. After about 40 minutes, I asked again where we were going. He said, "Just trust me, you're gonna freak when you see it." Total hidden gem. That's when I started texting my location to a friend, just in case. I wasn't scared exactly, just uneasy. He didn't seem dangerous, but the situation felt off. Like, even if it was innocent, what kind of person brings someone on a first date to the middle of nowhere without warning? We finally pulled off onto a dirt road. No signs, no buildings, just trees closing in from both sides. I asked, "Aren't we still in the city?" And he laughed and said, "We're about an hour out. This is my favorite place to clear my head." I stared at him like, "Are you serious?" But he looked proud, like he just gave me the best gift ever. He parked in front of this old-looking cabin. Nothing sketchy like blood on the windows, but definitely not something you expect to be standing in front of with a guy you barely know. He said it belonged to his uncle, but nobody uses it. I stayed sitting in the car, trying to decide if I was overreacting or not. He looked at me and said, "You coming?" Like this was all completely normal. I got out mostly because I didn't want to be stuck in the car alone in the woods, and followed him toward the porch. The place looked straight out of a movie where people get chased by ghosts or serial killers. Tyler unlocked the door and said, "Don't mind the dust, it's been a minute," and flicked on a light that buzzed like it was about to explode. Inside was basically one room, old couch, table, fireplace that hadn't been used in years. There were board games stacked in one corner and a single mug on the kitchen counter. He looked around and said, "Still exactly how I remember it." I didn't say anything. I was trying not to freak out. It wasn't that I thought he'd do something. It was just the fact that I was completely isolated, no signal, no idea how to get back with a guy I'd known for less than a week. He opened the fridge, found a couple bottles of water, tossed me one, and started talking about how he wants to live off-grid someday. I pretended to sip the water and glanced around the room like I was looking for something to compliment. There was nothing, not even curtains. He said he thought I'd appreciate a place without distractions, that it would help us connect better. I laughed nervously and said I was more of a distractions kind of person. He didn't get the hint. We sat on the couch, and he started talking about nature, how people have forgotten how to be still, how he's been practicing silence for 30 minutes every morning. He said a bunch of stuff about frequency and how phones are making everyone sick. I nodded along but kept thinking, how do I get out of here without making it weird? After maybe 20 minutes of awkward talking, and him showing me how the fireplace technically still works, I stood up and said I wasn't feeling well and probably needed to head back. His whole vibe shifted. He looked disappointed, kind of annoyed even. Said, "I thought you'd be different, like me not wanting to spend a spontaneous date in a random cabin with some deep betrayal." He didn't argue, but the silence on the drive back was thick. No music, no small talk. Just the sound of tires on gravel and my own pulse in my ears. I kept my eyes on my phone, waiting for signal bars to pop back up. When they finally did, I texted my friend again and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. When we got near my place, he pulled over and said, "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for," which sounded like the end of a breakup scene. I said, "Thanks for the ride," and got out without another word. I walked into my apartment, kicked off my shoes, and sat on the floor for a minute just processing. I wasn't mad, just confused. Who thinks it's okay to drive someone into the woods on a first date without telling them? It wasn't romantic. It wasn't bold. It was just inconsiderate and kind of reckless. The next day, he messaged me saying he hoped I didn't feel thrown off and that he really thought we had a rare connection. I didn't reply. Maybe if he'd asked me, maybe if he'd explained. Maybe if the cabin had Wi-Fi and wasn't in a place where bears probably live, I could have laughed it off. But instead, all I remember is the sound of the truck rolling deeper into the trees and the feeling of being somewhere I didn't choose to be, with someone who thought that was perfectly fine. I wasn't even going to go. I'd canceled 2 dates that month already. and I was at the point where just getting dressed for one felt like a chore. But Megan had been persistent in this confident, not annoying kind of way, and I figured that meant at least she knew what she wanted. Her profile said she was into travel, museums, and long walks, which made her sound like someone's aunt, but her pictures had this laid-back energy that made me curious. She picked the spot, a quiet coffee shop near the art district, and I agreed mostly because it wasn't too far from my place and I could walk there. She was already there when I arrived, sitting outside with her sunglasses on and a book in her lap, looking like someone who'd just walked out of a French film. She waved, stood up, and hugged me like we'd known each other for years. It was a little much, but not in a bad way. I thought, cool, she's warm. Maybe this will be one of those rare normal dates. We ordered drinks. She got something iced with oat milk, I got black coffee, and grabbed a table under a big tree that offered just enough shade to make it feel like a scene out of a music video. For the first 10 minutes, things were good. We talked about dumb travel stories, favorite childhood snacks, why oat milk is both a scam and a gift depending on the barista. She had a sharp sense of humor, and I liked that she didn't pretend to be overly sweet or polished. She swore a lot, laughed loud, and kept making me guess things about her, which turned into this fun little game. Then it shifted. Right around the time we started talking about what we wanted out of dating, she leaned forward, looked me dead in the eye, and asked if I'd ever be open to converting. I thought she was joking. I even laughed a little, but she didn't blink. She just said, because I only date people who are serious about the long game, and faith is a non-negotiable for me. I tried to play it cool. I asked her what she meant by converting, like was she talking hypothetically or now, and she said eventually, but I won't get serious with anyone who wouldn't be willing. I told her I respected that, but that I didn't really practice any religion and hadn't for years. I expected her to maybe nod or say, cool, just asking. Instead, she tilted her head and said, well, I wouldn't waste time on someone who doesn't believe in something. She said it like she was stating a fact. Not judgmental exactly, but firm. Like she'd already decided what kind of person I was. I told her I wasn't anti anything, just didn't really buy into organized faith for myself. That it wasn't something I thought about a lot. She raised an eyebrow and said, that's exactly the kind of thing someone says when they'd never really had to fight for meaning. That sentence stuck with me. It sounded like the line she'd used before. I could feel myself starting to mentally step back from the date, like the conversation had taken a hard left, and now we were in territory that felt way too deep for a first meetup. She didn't seem to notice or didn't care. She launched into this long explanation about how her values were shaped by her upbringing and how she refused to settle for a maybe person. She said she'd rather be single forever than waste time with someone who couldn't share her vision. And here's the thing, it wasn't even that I had a problem with her being religious. People believe what they believe. But the way she talked about it, it didn't feel like she wanted a partner. She wanted a project. She started listing expectations like she was laying out a contract, open to weekly services, willing to abstain from certain things, understanding of specific traditions, and committed to raising future kids the right way. Her words, not mine. At some point, I just kind of zoned out. Not to be rude, but because I already knew where it was going. She wasn't asking. She was filtering. I was just another profile she wanted to test for compatibility and was clearly failing. I looked around the coffee shop, people reading, someone sketching in a notebook, a couple laughing quietly at the next table, and I suddenly felt like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She must have picked up on my silence because she asked, is this making you uncomfortable? I told her honestly, a little, yeah. I said it was a lot for a first date, and that I wasn't sure what she expected me to say. She nodded like she respected the honesty, then said, I just don't want to waste time pretending something could work when we're not aligned. I asked if she always brought this up on first dates. She said yes, every time. She told me that being upfront saves people from confusion later, which, okay, fair. But it also felt like she wasn't giving anyone a chance to surprise her. Like she was fast-forwarding through the parts of dating that are supposed to be about discovery and connection and going slow. She wanted instant compatibility or nothing. After that, the conversation fizzled. She looked at her watch and said she had a yoga class. I said she did going too. We stood up, and she gave me a hug that was much colder than the first one. She said, good luck out there, like I was about to head into battle. I walked home in this weird mix of relief and frustration. I wasn't upset that she had strong beliefs. I was upset that she saw people as checkboxes. Convert or don't, believe or don't. Fit the mold or move along. It felt like she didn't want to know who I was, just whether I could play the role she'd written. The next day, she unmatched me. No message, no follow-up, just gone. And honestly, that was the best part of the whole thing. Clean exit, no guessing. But every now and then, I think about how some people treat dating like a hiring process. Like they got a list of must-haves taped to the inside of their skulls and they walk around interviewing strangers, waiting to tick boxes. No space for a maybe. No room for a let's see. Just yes or no. I guess I was a no, and I'm good with that. Some people say they're close with their mom, and you think, that's sweet. Family oriented, respectful, probably knows how to do his own laundry. But then there's whatever Daniel had going on. This wasn't close. This was sitcom level, red flag waving, boundary free weirdness, and it didn't take long to find out. We matched on a dating app, nothing wild. He seemed normal, kind of shy in a charming way. Good grammar, which is underrated, and he wasn't just sending dry hey messages. He actually asked stuff. Favorite movie as a kid? Last thing that made me cry laugh. He seemed really into connection, whatever that means. So when he asked if I wanted to grab dinner, I said sure. He picked the place. A small Italian spot tucked into a side street, dim lights, candles, all very second date energy, but fine. I like pasta. I got there a few minutes early and saw him already waiting at a table inside. He stood up when I walked in and gave me this warm half smile like we were already in the middle of a conversation. He pulled out my chair, sat back down, and started talking right away. Something about the specials, how they had this seasonal gnocchi that was apparently life-changing. I smiled and tried to settle in, but I felt this weird tingle on the back of my neck. Not danger, just that something was off. It took up 2 minutes to notice her. There was a woman sitting alone at a table just a little behind us, angled perfectly to see us, but not close enough to hear everything. She had a glass of water, no food, no menu. Just sitting there perfectly still, looking in our direction like she was casually people watching. Except her eyes didn't move. Her attention was fixed. It was subtle, but after a while, you could feel it. I leaned in a little and asked Daniel, Haig, do you know that woman? He looked over his shoulder, then smiled like I'd asked him if it was going to rain. Oh, that's my mom. I thought he was joking. I laughed. He didn't. He just nodded like this was a totally reasonable situation. She likes to be around for first dates. Just in case. Just in case what? I wanted to ask that so badly, but I just blinked at him and said she came with you. And he was like, she drove separately. She won't bother us or anything. She just likes to be nearby. He said it so casually, like we were talking about weather, that he just picked up the menu and started talking about what he might order. I sat there trying to make sense of it. Was she here for safety? His safety. My safety. Was this a thing he did regularly? Did she have a ranking system? Was she going to write a review afterward? I couldn't even look at the menu. I just stared at him, then at her, then back at him, wondering if this was the real reason he was single. He noticed I wasn't saying much and said, she's actually really good at picking up on people's energy. After my last breakup, I kind of let her help screen the next few dates. He said, screen like I was a job applicant, like this was an interview and his mom was the manager in the corner. I asked him, has this ever made someone uncomfortable? And he said, only people who had something to hide. Okay, sure. Or maybe people who don't want to eat spaghetti under surveillance. I tried to shake it off and steer the conversation back to something normal. Asked him what he did for work. He said he worked in product management, something about app design, and added along. I was halfway through telling him about a client horror story for my job when I saw her looking at me again. Not glaring, not even frowning, just analyzing, like I was being studied through glass. At that point, I was thinking, do I stay and eat my free carbs, or do I bail and spend the night explaining this disaster to my friends in a group chat? I decided to power through, but I was completely checked out. Dana, though, totally relaxed. Asking questions, telling me about his dog, talking about how he loves rainy weather. Meanwhile, I'm just doing mental gymnastics to figure out how to exit without being rude. Eventually, I excused myself to the bathroom, not because I had to go, but because I needed a second to process. I stared in the mirror like, this cannot be real. Then I came back out and caught his mom smiling at me. Not a creepy smile, just a knowing one, like she'd already made up her mind about me. The food came. We ate, kind of. I picked at mine. He devoured his like nothing was weird. He asked if I wanted dessert. I said no. Then came the check. He paid, no problem, which might have been sweet if I hadn't spent the entire meal wondering if I was being judged for how I held my fork. When we stood up to leave, his mom stood up too. She waved at him, then looked directly at me and said, "It was lovely to meet you." I said, "You too," because I didn't know what else to say. Then she walked out, cool as ever, like she hadn't just spent an hour being the most silent third wheel in date history. Daniel walked me in my car and said he had a great time. He asked if I wanted to do it again sometime. I said something vague like, "I'll let you know," which in date language means absolutely not. The next day he texted me, "My mom really liked you. Said you seemed smart and composed." I didn't reply. There was no reply to that. It's not about hating his mom. I'm sure she's a lovely person. And I get that people have tight families. But bringing your mom to your first date and pretending like that's normal, that's a whole different level. That's not sweet. That's not quirky. That's just someone who shouldn't be dating yet. So, yeah, the next time a guy says he's close with his mom, I'm asking follow-up questions. Like how close? Like she knows your passwords? Or like she's in the booth next to us while I order my drink? Because I'm not trying to date someone who brings a chaperone, especially one who thinks they're subtle. Catfishing always sounded like something that happened to other people, like some internet cautionary tale you hear about on a podcast where a story your friend tells that ends with "I should have known." I'd never thought I'd be the one sitting across from a stranger pretending everything was fine, while pretending she wasn't a completely different person than the one I've been talking to for weeks. But here we are. I met Amanda on a dating app. Her pictures were unreal, not in an obviously fake way, just almost too good to be true. The kind of good where you start to feel a little lucky she matched with you. But she was funny too. Her profile said she liked bad reality TV, fresh baked bread, and people who could quote movies from the early 2000s. We started talking, and the conversation just flowed. She had that quick, sarcastic kind of humor that makes texting addictive. I find myself smiling at my phone like an idiot and repeating stuff she said before I fell asleep. She said she wasn't a big fan of video calls. Said she had a weird relationship with cameras and didn't like how she looked on screen. I didn't push. Some people are like that. We voice messaged sometimes, short stuff, but still enough to feel like I was talking to a real person. The voice matched the photos, or at least I convinced myself it did. After 2 weeks of nonstop texting, we agreed to meet. She picked a casual burger place, the kind with mismatched chairs and paper menus, which made me like her even more. She said, "Let's keep it low-key," and I thought finally, someone normal. I got there first. Ordered a soda, grabbed a booth by the window, and tried not to check my phone every 30 seconds. Then I saw someone walking toward me, smiling like we'd already met, and I froze. It wasn't her. I mean, it was Amanda, technically, but not the Amanda from the photos. Not even close. Different body type, different face shape, different everything. She looked a little like the girl in the pictures if you squinted hard and turned the lights down really low, but it was obvious. It wasn't just a case of good angles or heavy filters. It was a completely different person. She sat down across from me and said, "Hey," like we were continuing a conversation. I stared for a second, trying to keep my face from doing anything rude, but I must have looked confused because she immediately said, "So, yeah, I should probably explain." I didn't say anything, just waited. She told me she used her sister's pictures, that everything else was real, the messages, the voice memos, the jokes, but the photos weren't. She said she usually didn't get matches with her real pictures, and the ones of her sister helped her get through the door. I sat there, not really sure what I was supposed to say to that. She admitted it so casually, like it was just a small white lie. Like it was the same as rounding your height up or saying you love hiking when you don't. I asked her, "Why not just use your own photos?" And she said, "Because no one gives people like me a chance." She didn't say it in a sad way, either. She said it like she was daring me to disagree, like this was just the way the game worked. I took a sip of my soda and tried to make sense of how I felt. Part of me was mad, not furious, just disappointed in a way that feels heavy. I'd let myself get excited. I told a couple friends about her, said this one actually seemed cool. I had built a version of her in my head, one that wasn't real. That version didn't exist. She started talking again, fast as time, like she wanted to control the story before I walked out. She said she hated how fake dating apps felt, that people only cared about looks, that if she'd used her real pictures, I probably wouldn't have even swiped right. She said, "But you like me, right? Like the rest didn't matter." And the thing is, I had liked her, or who I thought she was. I didn't know what to do with that. I asked her, "How long were you going to wait before telling me?" She shrugged. Said she figured maybe a few dates. Said she was hoping by then I liked her enough that it wouldn't matter. I didn't respond. I just sat there listening to the music playing from the kitchen and trying to figure out how this had gone from something promising to something that made my stomach twist. She asked if I wanted to stay and at least eat. Said she didn't expect anything romantic, just that she thought we could still hang out. I looked at her, this person who had put on a mask to get my attention, and then showed up hoping I wouldn't mind that the mask was fake. I said, "I think I'm gonna head out." She didn't try to stop me, just gave this tiny nod and looked away like she'd seen it coming. On the walk home, I kept going over the whole thing in my head, wondering if I'd been unfair, wondering if I should have stayed, but I kept landing in the same place. It wasn't about her looks. It wasn't about being surprised. It was about trust. She started this whole thing by pretending to be someone else, and then expected me to be cool with it once it was convenient for her to come clean. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been part of a weird experiment. Later that night, she sent me a message. Just said, "Sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I get why you left." I didn't reply. People always talk about chemistry and compatibility and timing, but no one really talks about how important honesty is in that very first moment, before anything's even real. The second someone lies about who they are to get you to show up, the foundation's already cracked. So, yeah, I learned something that day. If someone says they hate video calls and all their photos look like a model's Instagram page, maybe ask more questions. Or maybe just trust your gut. Especially when that gut says, this person might not be who they say they are. Because sometimes they're really not. There's a very specific kind of awkward when someone spends an entire first date talking about their ex. Like, not just a mention or a funny story, but a full-on, start-to-finish, detailed breakdown of the relationship. That was already bad enough. But what made this one even worse was that I wasn't just hearing about Ryan's ex-girlfriend. I was apparently the sequel. According to him, I reminded him of her in all of the best ways. I met Ryan through a friend, not an app, not a random DM, an actual real-life introduction, which I thought gave him bonus points. My friend said he was funny, smart, and just got out of a long-term relationship but was ready to put himself out there. At first I wasn't sure, but he messaged me later that night with this low-effort but kind of charming, "Tell me your most unpopular opinion" text, and we ended up texting back and forth until almost 2 a.m. He asked me to dinner, offered to pick me up, which I said no to because I don't love getting in cars with strangers, even if a mutual friend swears they're cool. We met at a pub-style restaurant, dark wood everything, lots of cozy booths and big portions. It was loud enough to drown out awkward silences, but not so loud that we had to shout. He got there before me and waved me over when I walked in. He stood up, hugged me, seemed relaxed. It was all going fine for exactly 5 minutes. It started with a harmless comment. I ordered a drink, and he said that was her favorite. I asked who he meant, and he said, "My ex." I laughed because I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. He smiled at his menu like he just remembered a funny story and said, "Yeah, she always used to order that. She was obsessed with gin and tonics." I nodded and tried to keep it moving. I figured maybe it was just a slip. First date jitters. People say weird stuff. But then it kept happening. I mentioned I work in marketing, and he said, "That's crazy, so did she." I said I liked hiking, and he said, "You even like the same stuff. You're like the upgraded version of her." I kind of froze after that. Upgraded version isn't exactly what you want to hear when someone's describing you. It's not a compliment. It's just a reminder that you're being compared. I said, "Do you talk about her a lot on first dates?" Trying to sound light, not annoyed. He said, "Only when it's relevant. I'm not hung up or anything." Spoiler, he was definitely hung up. He kept bringing her up. Her name was Lucy. I remember because he said it like I should already know her. Like she was part of the conversation whether I liked it or not. He told me how they met, where they used to go on dates, how long they lived together, what finally ended it. He said, I think we were just too similar, and then looked at me for a little too long like he was searching for proof that I was different enough. At some point I said, do you want to talk about something else? And he smiled and said, sorry, I just didn't expect someone to remind me so much of her. I didn't know what to say to that. How do you respond to being treated like a ghost of someone else's relationship? He asked if I wanted to split an appetizer, and when I said sure, he picked the one she used to love. He even said, this one always reminds me of her, while ordering. I don't even remember what it was. I just remember thinking, I'm not here to audition for the role of your ex-girlfriend. When the food came, I barely touched it. He was talking about their trip to Italy, how they fought over a Vespa rental, how she'd cry on the plane ride home. I nodded like I was listening, but I was zoning out. Counting the lights on the ceiling, watching the waiter refill other people's drinks, checking the clock on my phone, and wondering how long I had to stay before it stopped being rude to leave. Then he said it. He looked at me right in the middle of talking about their breakup and said, I think you get along with her. You're a little smart in that way where it's a little intimidating but also super attractive. I blinked and said, I don't really want to meet your ex. He smiled and said, yeah, I know what just to say. It's cool how similar you are. I finally asked, are you actually over her? He looked at me like I'd asked a weird question and said, I mean, yeah, mostly. There's always gonna be some part of me that misses her, but that's normal, right? I told him I didn't really think that talking about your ex for over an hour on a first date was normal. That maybe he needed a little more time before jumping back into dating. He looked defensive for a second, then kind of shrugged and said, I just thought it was refreshing to be honest. There's honesty, and then there's turning someone into a stand-in for the person you wish you were still with. This felt like the second one. He paid the bill without asking if I wanted to split it, which might have been the one nice part of the night, and then walked me to the door. He asked if I wanted to hang out again. I said, I think you still had some stuff to work through. And he said, fair enough. I walked back to my car and sat there for a minute before driving home. Not because I was upset, just trying to process how weird it is to be in the room with someone who clearly wants you to be someone else. He didn't even realize how much he talked about her. Or maybe he did. Maybe he just hoped I wouldn't care. The next day, he texted me, hey, sorry if I said too much. I really did have a good time. You remind me of a really good part of my life. I didn't answer. I don't want to be anyone's memory. I don't want to be the you're just like her girl. I want someone who's actually there, not mentally sorting through their past while looking at my face. It's not a compliment when someone says you remind them of someone they're still not over. It's just a reminder that you're sitting in someone else's seat, and I'm not signing up for that. There's awkward, and then there's full-on identity crisis awkward. And this date with Lauren definitely falls into the second category. I don't usually care if people have strong opinions. In fact, I kind of like it when someone has real thoughts and isn't afraid to say them. But there's a difference between having values and acting like you're hosting a debate team tryout. Lauren wasn't on a date with me. She was testing me, grading me, like she was trying to figure out whether I could pass some unspoken purity test before the appetizers even showed up. We met through a dating app that asks way too many questions. It's one of those where they try to match you based on deep compatibility, which usually just means they pair you with someone who likes the same 3 TV shows and doesn't smoke. Her profile was sharp. She wrote full sentences, threw in a couple jokes, and mentioned she liked people who knew where they stood. I figured that meant she didn't like flaky people. What it really meant was that she had a full moral compass tattooed to her forehead and expected you to recite it back to her in perfect order. She picked the spot, this modern vegan place with industrial lighting and chairs that looked cool but hurt after 5 minutes. I showed up on time. She was already there, sipping tea and scrolling on her phone with that intense face people get when they're reading the comments under something political. She stood up, hugged me like she knew she should, then sat right back down like she had things to do. The first few minutes were fine. Basic intros. I complimented her earrings. She said she made them herself. I asked how her day had been, and she said it had been mentally exhausting. That should have been my first clue. I asked why, and she launched straight into a rant about how her coworkers were problematic, and she couldn't keep educating people who weren't willing to grow. I nodded, trying to keep up. She talked like she was always 3 points ahead of the conversation, like she was expecting me to say something ignorant just so she could correct me. Then it started, the quiz. She asked what news I read. I told her I usually scan a few different sources. She immediately asked which ones, and when I told her, she raised her eyebrows and said, "Interesting." Not in the curious way, in the disappointed teacher way. Then she asked how I voted in the last election. I hesitated, which was a mistake. She said, "You don't know?" And I said, "No, I just wasn't expecting to get into it right away." She laughed, sharp and dry, and said, "It's a simple question." So I answered. And then came question 2, and 3, and 15. What were my thoughts on prison reform? How did I feel about reparations? What was my stance on late-stage capitalism, and did I think billionaires should exist? I'm not kidding. I wasn't even halfway through my veggie burger, and I was being grilled harder than the tofu. Every answer I gave was followed by a judgment. A nod if she agreed, a frown if she didn't. She didn't raise her voice or argue, she just made it clear that there was a right answer and a wrong answer, and she was a one-keeping score. I tried shifting the vibe. Asked her what she liked to do for fun, thinking maybe we could talk music or movies. She said she doesn't watch mindless media anymore because it dulls critical thinking. I asked if she at least had a guilty pleasure show, and she said guilt is a useless emotion, and she doesn't believe in shame culture. At which I was making this up. At one point, I said something like, "I think people can disagree on some things and still connect." She leaned in and said, "Not if those things include human rights." I said, "Well, yeah, obviously." But she cut me off and said, "People say that but then stay quiet when it counts." I took a sip of water and stared at my plate, which had gone cold while I was trying to avoid stepping on conversational landmines. Then she hit me with it. She said, "I only date people whose politics align 100% with mine." I asked, "You mean completely?" And she said, "Exactly. There's no point wasting time with someone who doesn't already understand the truth." The truth? Like it was a single object you could hand someone wrapped in a bow. I asked her, "So what happens if someone agrees with you on most things, but not everything?" She shrugged and said, "Then they're not for me." I said, "Don't you think growth sometimes comes from conversation?" She smiled, and not in a kind way. That's what people who want to feel comfortable say when they're being complicit. I was starting to feel like I'd walked into a pop quiz I hadn't studied for. It didn't even feel like a date anymore. It felt like a weird social exam, where the goal wasn't to get to know each other, but to prove that I had read the exact same books as her, in the same order, and memorized every page. After a while, I stopped trying to impress her. I just ate my food and nodded. It wasn't that I disagreed with everything she was saying. Some of it was important, some of it was even stuff I cared about. But the way she delivered it, like she was testing me for a secret club, it just shut everything down. When the check came, she said we should split it for fairness. I said cool. I paid my half and got up, and she said, "Thanks for being willing to talk." I almost laughed. I'd barely talked at all. Outside, she said, "I don't think we're on the same wavelength, but I'm glad we met." I said, "Yeah, good luck with everything." She walked off like she'd just completed a task. That night, she sent me a 3-paragraph text saying she thought I was well-meaning but a bit passive, and that I should interrogate why I felt uncomfortable being held accountable. I didn't reply. It's one thing to care about the world. It's another to treat every day like a courtroom. I wasn't looking for someone to agree with me on every single thing. I just wanted a conversation, not a checklist. She wasn't looking for a partner. She was looking for a reflection. And that's not me. Sometimes the worst part about dating isn't the bad conversation or the awkward silences. It's when someone shows you who they really are way too quickly, and you're stuck sitting across from them trying to pretend it's not happening. That's what happened with Chris. The wild thing is, everything leading up to the date was pretty much perfect. He messaged first, wasn't overly eager, actually asked thoughtful questions. He had a dry sense of humor that worked well over text, and he was the right kind of sarcastic, not mean, just observant. It felt like we were on the same page. We made plans for coffee, which I was relieved about. Low commitment, easy out if it got weird. The cafe was quiet, sort of rustic with a few mismatched chairs and some sleepy music playing. He was already there when I walked in, wearing a denim jacket and reading something on his phone. He looked up, smiled, and stood up to hug me. It all felt very normal, comfortable. We ordered our drinks and grabbed a table near the window. He got a cold brew. I got latte. The first 10 or 15 minutes were honestly nice. We talked about work, travel, our favorite dumb YouTube rabbit holes. He told me a story about getting locked out of his apartment in boxers and slippers, and I laughed harder than I expected to. I thought, okay, maybe this could be a real thing. Then the conversation drifted into mental health. Not on purpose. I think I mentioned how work had been stressful lately and how therapy had helped me a lot a couple years back when I was going through a rough patch. I wasn't dropping some dramatic monologue, just casually mentioned it in passing. That's when everything changed. He paused, gave this short little laugh, and said, "Oh, you're one of those therapy people." I blinked, not sure what that even meant. I said, "What do you mean?" And he leaned back, arms crossed, and said, "It's just funny how everyone thinks they need therapy now, like it's a personality trait." I tried to laugh it off. I said, I don't think it's that weird. A lot of people go to therapy." And he said, "Yeah, that's the problem." I gave him a second to explain himself, hoping it was just a bad take he walked back. He didn't. Instead, he launched into this full explanation about how he doesn't believe in therapy, thinks it makes people soft, and that real problems can be solved with discipline and a good routine. I asked, "So you don't think mental health is real?" And he said, "It's real, but it's exaggerated. Like, people have always had problems. We didn't used to label every mood swing as trauma." I said, "That's kind of a harsh way to put it," and he just shrugged. "I'm just being honest." Then came the line I still think about. He said, "I would never date someone who's been on antidepressants. That stuff changes your brain. You're not the same after." I just stared at him. I didn't even respond right away because I thought maybe I misheard him. He looked at me like he was waiting for me to agree, like this was just a normal opinion to share while sipping cold brew on a Wednesday afternoon. I asked, "What if someone needed them to get through something hard, like grief or depression?" He said, "Then they're not stable. I'm not saying it's their fault, but it's not my responsibility to deal with someone else's baggage." He said it in that flat, matter-of-fact tone people use when they're trying to sound reasonable while saying something absolutely awful. I wasn't even angry. I just felt stunned. Like I was watching someone slowly peel back a mask, layer by layer. He didn't even sound mean. He just truly believed what he was saying. Like it had never occurred to him that life is hard and people sometimes need help that doesn't come from running 5 miles and eating more kale. I said, it's kind of ironic that you're sitting here judging people for getting help when you clearly have no empathy." That's when he got defensive. Said I was twisting his words, that he didn't mean it like that, and that he just didn't want to date someone who needed pills to function. I asked, "So if someone had cancer and needed chemo, would that be a deal breaker too?" He rolled his eyes and said, "That's not the same, and you know it." I said, "Yeah, it kind of is. You just don't see it that way because you've never had to deal with it." He took a long sip of his drink and said, "Look, I'm just not into people with emotional instability. That's not attractive to me." I grabbed my bag and stood up. He asked, "Are you leaving?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "Wow, sensitive much?" And I said, "Yeah, and proud of it." I walked out of that cafe feeling like I'd just escaped a black hole. Not because I cared what he thought of me. I didn't. But because I'd spent half an hour thinking he was someone he wasn't. And I hate that feeling. When someone seems so normal, so chill, and then suddenly they start saying things that make your whole body tense up. He texted me later that night saying he was surprised I couldn't handle a difference of opinion. I didn't respond. That's not a difference of opinion. That's ignorance dressed up like logic. I told a friend about it the next day, and she said, "You should have asked if he also avoids people who've had dental surgery. Wouldn't want to date anyone who's been chemically altered." We laughed about it, but underneath the joke, I felt something else. Relief. Because I knew if I hadn't said anything, I would have spent the rest of the week trying to pretend it wasn't a big deal. Trying to find excuses for someone who didn't deserve them. So now I have a new rule. If someone calls therapy trendy or says mental health is just an excuse, I'm done. I'm not going to argue. I'm not going to explain. I'm just going to leave. Because life is already hard. I don't need to date someone who thinks having feelings makes you broken. I need someone who gets it. Or at the very least, someone who doesn't look at you like you're less for surviving something they'll never understand. First dates are weird enough without someone trying to rewrite your entire life plan over dinner. That's what it felt like with Jessica. Like I was being gently nudged into a future I didn't want. And when I didn't lean into it, she took it personally. I walked in thinking we were grabbing a casual dinner. She walked in like she was casting for the role of future co-parent. We met through an app, which I was starting to regret even being on. Her profile was all soft colors and golden hour selfies with quotes about intentional living and deep conversations only, which I normally avoid, but I was curious. Her messages were sweet. She seemed like she actually wanted to get to know me, not just trade one-liners and ghost. We agreed on this Italian place halfway between our neighborhoods. Kind of dim, nice enough for a Friday night without screaming commitment. She was already at the table when I got there. Waved at me, stood up to hug me, all smiles and warm energy. Her voice was softer than I expected, and she talked like she was telling a bedtime story. Slow, calm, thoughtful. I liked it at first. Made me feel like I didn't have to perform. The conversation was normal in the beginning. We talked about our jobs. She worked in nonprofit operations, a kind of role where you have to care a lot and get paid very little. I told her I worked in it, which immediately launched us into a side chat about how she always breaks her printer and refuses to update her phone. We laughed. We ordered pasta. Everything was fine. Then she asked me, out of nowhere, "Do you want kids?" I was mid-bite, so I finished chewing and answered honestly, "No, I don't think I do." She nodded like she heard me, but she didn't hear me. She said, "Oh, I used to feel that way too. You'll change your mind." I smiled and said, "I've actually felt that way since I was a teenager. It's never really been something I wanted." She kept smiling, but the tone had already shifted. She said, "That's okay. People go through phases. You probably just haven't met the right person yet." I didn't say anything right away, just took a sip of water and looked at the menu again. Even though we'd already ordered, she kept going. Told me about how she always knew she wanted to be a mom, and it wasn't just a dream, it was part of her identity. That she couldn't wait to grow a family and teach her kids all the things no one taught her. It was sweet the way she said it, but it was also clear. She wasn't just telling me about herself. She was trying to write me into that story. I said, "That's beautiful, but I just don't see myself ever being a dad. I don't think it's something I'd be good at, and I like the life I have." She paused and said, "It's kind of sad to hear that. Don't you want to leave something behind?" I laughed a little and said, "Not really. I'm fine just living while I'm alive." I was trying to keep it light, not get pulled into a heavy debate about legacy. She wasn't having it. She said, "I think it's selfish, honestly." That stopped me. I asked, "Selfish how?" She said, "You have so much to offer. And instead of passing that on, you're just keeping it to yourself." I blinked, not because I was hurt, but because I couldn't believe how confident she was in her judgment. I said, "I think it'd be more selfish to bring a child into the world just because I wanted to, when I don't actually feel capable or interested in raising one." She shook her head like she was disappointed, like I had said something small-minded. She said, "But don't you want someone to take care of you when you're old?" I laughed and said, "That's probably the worst reason to have a kid." She didn't laugh. We sat in silence for a bit. Our food came. I started eating because I didn't know what else to do. She picked at hers, clearly distracted. Then she asked, "Have you always felt this way? Or did something happen to make you afraid of responsibility?" That was the moment I mentally checked out. I said, "No trauma, no fear. Just a decision I've made out what kind of life I want." She nodded again, but I could tell she was already filing me into the category of people who don't get it. She tried to bring it back around, asked about my childhood, asked if I liked being around kids in general. I gave short answers. I could tell she was trying to find the loophole. Like if she just asked the right question, I'd accidentally admit I secretly wanted kids, and then the entire narrative she built would still work. She said, "I really think people say they don't want kids until they hold their own baby." I said, "That's why I don't plan on having one to test that theory." She didn't smile at that. Eventually, she said, "Well, I hope you meet someone who changes your mind." I said, "I hope you meet someone who doesn't try to." That was the end of it. When the check came, we split it. She said, "Good luck with whatever it is you're trying to build without a family." I said, "Thanks. I hope your future kids appreciate all the pressure you're already putting on them." We walked out together. She gave me a side hug like we were ex-coworkers or something. I said goodbye and she said, "Take care." She didn't mean it. She unmatched me before I even got home. which honestly made it easier. It still blows my mind how someone can smile at you and call you selfish in the same breath. How people think they're being kind when they're really just being dismissive. I wasn't angry, just tired. Tired of defending a choice that affects no one but me. Tired of people thinking you'll change your mind is something kind to say. I didn't need to be fixed. I didn't need to be taught how beautiful parenting can be. I needed someone who could hear what I said and believe me. That's all. And until I meet someone who can do that, I'll keep enjoying quiet nights, clean apartments, and every morning I don't have to step on a toy on the way to the kitchen. You ever sit across from someone and realize you're not really a person to them? You're just a symbol, a box they want to tick, a way to prove something to themselves. That's how it felt with Mark. I didn't get it right away, though. At first, it seemed like a normal date. Chill vibe, decent conversation, good food. But halfway through, I figured out what was really going on. I wasn't just some girl he matched with. I was a weird victory lap. A trophy with the same last name as the girl who dumped him. We matched like everyone else does. Dumb app, mutual swipe, some flirty messages, a few voice notes. He had that kind of fake laid-back confidence, like a guy who peaked in college and never really came down from it. His pictures weren't bad, and he messaged first, which is honestly rare these days. He kept the conversation going, asked actual questions, made jokes that weren't copy-paste. He said he knew a good place to get pizza downtown that wasn't loud or pretentious. I said yes because I was bored and figured worst case I'd get dinner out of it. He showed up looking exactly like his pictures, always a good sign. Smelled expensive. Clean sneakers. Firm handshake that made me laugh because who does that on a date? We sat down, got into it fast. Music, food, travel, all the usual stuff. I mentioned my cousin in a story about a concert we went to. Didn't say her name yet. He raised an eyebrow and said, "You have a cousin who lives around here." I said, "Yeah." He asked what her name was. I told him, "Jessica." And that's when his whole expression shifted. He leaned back a little and laughed, not in a funny way. In a "this is hilarious to me" way. Then he said, "No way. I used to date her." I stared at him. I thought he was kidding, but he kept going. "Yeah, we were together for a while. Like almost a year, actually." My stomach dropped a little. This wasn't someone she'd just gone out with once. This was the guy she told me about. The one who was charming at first, but ended up being manipulative in this subtle, controlling way. She never said his name, just called him the guy who made me feel crazy. And now here he was, smiling at me like he found a cheat code. I asked him if he knew we were related when we matched. He said no, that he didn't realize it until I said her name. I asked if he still talked to her. He said no, that she blocked him after the breakup. Then he said the thing that made me want to throw my drink in his lap. "You're definitely the upgraded version." I blinked. What? He nodded like he just gave me a compliment. "No offense to her, but you're more grounded, more mature." She was kind of all over the place emotionally. I pushed my plate away. He kept talking. Said he always thought she was hot but hard to handle, and that I seemed more put together. Said he was glad he ran into me because it felt like things came full circle. I told him, "This is messed up." He acted confused. Said, "Why? You're not her. You're your own person." I said, "Yeah, and you dated my cousin. That's weird." He shrugged and said, "It's not like I planned it. But we matched, so I figured, why not see where it goes?" I asked him if he would have told me if I hadn't said her name. He didn't answer that, just changed the subject. Started asking about what I do for work again, like we could rewind the date and pretend everything was fine. I wasn't playing along. He eventually admitted he did recognize me a little, from a photo Jessica had posted a couple years ago. Said it didn't click right away. Once I mentioned the concert, it came back to him. I asked, "And you still came anyway?" He said I was curious. Curious. That's why I was to him. Some messed up curiosity, a comparison. I told him I wasn't comfortable staying, and he got defensive. Said he didn't do anything wrong, that it wasn't like he was cheating, that Jessica wasn't a part of his life anymore. I said, "Well, she's a part of mine." He said, "She never said she had a cousin that's hot." That was it. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked out. He didn't follow me. He didn't call after me. Just sat there like he was the one who got rejected. On the way home, I texted Jessica, told her what happened. She called me immediately. She wasn't even mad, just laughed and said, of course he would pull something like that. Said he always needed to prove he could win even when no one was playing. He texted me the next day. Said he had a great time and hoped I didn't take it the wrong way. Said he felt like we had chemistry and wanted to try again. I blocked his number without answering. I'm not mad that we matched. That part was probably an accident. But showing up in asterisk staying asterisk after knowing who I was, that was a choice. A gross one. He didn't want to date. He wanted to win. To prove he could still get someone in the family like it meant something. Like people are points in some twisted scoreboard he keeps in his head. I don't know if he ever really liked Jessica. I don't know if he ever really liked me. I don't think it matters. Some people aren't dating because they want love. They're dating because they want control. They want stories. They want to say, yeah, I dated her cousin too. Like that's an achievement. Let him have it. I'm not sticking around to be his next anecdote. Some people do research before a date to stay safe. Google the name, maybe check LinkedIn or skim a couple social posts. Just enough to make sure they're real. What Hannah did was not research. It was full-on premeditated psychological warfare, and I didn't realize it until I was already halfway through a molten brownie with a girl who had apparently been studying my past like it was for a final exam. It started like most dates do. Mutual swipe, basic banter, a few flirty jokes and some voice notes that made it feel like we actually had chemistry. She had this cool art girl energy. Her profile had hand-poked tattoos, moody film photos, and a bio that said, I people watch for inspiration, not judgment. Probably. I liked that. She seemed low pressure. I asked her out for dessert instead of dinner, thinking it'd be casual and short. No long sit down, no expectation of staying if it sucked. Just cake and conversation. We met at this dessert bar that tries way too hard to be Instagrammable. Neon signs, fancy plates, cocktails that looked like bath bombs. I got there first and she showed up in this huge hoodie, hair in a messy bun, red lipstick like she hadn't even thought about it, just was that cool. She hugged me like we were old friends and sat across from me, already talking like she had something to prove. At first it was fine. She talked fast but not in an annoying way, just excited. She told me about a mural she'd seen on the way there and how she sketches strangers she sees on the train. She was funny. A little intense, but I was into it. She asked good questions, or so I thought. Things got weird when she asked if I had ever been in a long-term relationship. I said, yeah, one serious one. It ended about a year ago. She smiled and nodded like she already knew that. Then she said, that was with the blonde girl, right? I froze. I hadn't mentioned anything about my ex. Not her name, not what she looked like, not even that she had social media. I laughed awkwardly and said, how do you know that? She just smiled and said, I saw her Instagram. She seems nice. I stared at her. She took a bite of her cake like she hadn't just admitted to looking at my ex. I said, wait, how did you even find her account? She shrugged and said, I looked through some tagged photos. You weren't exactly hiding her. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't posted with my ex in months. The account was private. The tags were old. She had dug, like went full cyber detective for no reason. I asked why she did that, and she said, I like to get a sense of someone's taste before I meet them. Taste. Like my ex was an outfit she was trying to outdo. Then she said, she's pretty, but in a really conventional way. You seem like someone who'd be more into personality than looks, though, right? I didn't know what to say. It felt like I was being tricked into confirming something. I said, I don't think I compare people like that. She said, you must, though. Everyone does, even if they don't say it. She pulled out her phone. I assumed she was checking a message. Nope. She literally opened up my ex's profile, turned her screen toward me, and said, this is her, right? I felt like I was being pranked. I said, why are you showing me this? And she said, I just want to know what you like about her. I didn't answer. I was too busy trying to figure out how fast I could pay and leave without being rude. She kept going. Said things like, Do you think she was your type or just who you ended up with at the time? And I don't mean to sound crazy, I'm just observant. I said, you sound a little obsessed, and she smiled like I gave her a compliment. Then she said the creepiest part. She said, it's kind of cool how we're nothing alike. It makes me wonder what you're looking for now. I wasn't looking for this, I'll tell you that much. I asked her if she does this with everyone she dates. She said, only the ones I'm curious about. I said, you realize that's not normal, right? And she said, neither is dating a stranger from the internet, but we're all here anyway. I couldn't argue with that. But still. I finished my drink and said I had to get up early the next day. She looked disappointed but not surprised. I asked for the bill, paid, and stood up. She stayed sitting, smiled, and said, you'll probably think about this later and laugh. She was right. I do think about it, but I had a laugh. I think about how someone can seem so normal and then just flip the switch into a whole different person. Not scary, just off. Like she was playing a game I didn't know I'd agreed to. Like she'd been watching from a distance and finally got to step into the scene. She texted me later that night and said she had fun. Said she hoped I didn't mind her curiosity and that she thought we had a real spark. I didn't respond. Not because I was mad. I just didn't want to give her anything else to analyze. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that some people don't want to meet you. They want to meet a version of you they've already made up in their heads. They scroll through your past, pick out the highlights, compare you to whoever came before, and then show up ready to take over the role. It's not dating. It's casting. And I'm not auditioning. Some dates are awkward, some are boring, and some start out totally fine before veering straight into what the hell is happening territory. That's exactly what it felt like with Josh. One minute we were ordering coffee and laughing about how we both hate small talk, and the next I was realizing we were being watched. Not by some stranger or by accident. By his mom, who was sitting 2 tables away pretending to read a magazine like she wasn't tracking our every word. We met on an app like everyone does now. He seemed normal. A little on the shy side, but in a kind way, not in an uncomfortable way. His profile said he liked photography, playing piano, and long talks with good people. He messaged first. Didn't open with anything weird or cringy. Just said, you seem like someone who notices things, which sounds like a line now that I think about it, but at the time it made me smile. After a week of chatting, we agreed to meet at a quiet cafe. I liked that he didn't push for drinks or dinner. It was low effort in a respectful way. Just 2 people seeing if there was something there. I showed up a few minutes early. He was already inside, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees, one in front of an empty chair. He stood up when he saw me and said he remembered I liked oat milk, which was a nice touch. We did the usual first date small talk, where we're from, what we do, random weird facts. He was soft-spoken, but funny when he got going. I felt comfortable, like I could actually breathe around him. I even caught myself thinking, maybe this one won't be a train wreck. But about 15 minutes in, I noticed her. A woman, maybe late 50s, sitting at a table near the window with a book in her lap that she hadn't turned a page of since I walked in. She was glancing over at us every few minutes. Not staring, just keeping tabs. It wasn't super obvious, but it was enough that I clocked it. At first, I figured maybe she was just a bored stranger. Then Josh glanced her way and gave her this quick little nod. That's what I knew. I asked, hey, do you know that woman? He hesitated for half a second too long and said, yeah, that's my mom. I waited for a punchline. It didn't come. She just likes to be nearby when I meet someone new, he added, like this was a totally reasonable thing to say. I blinked. You brought your mom. He shook his head. She drove separately. She's not like with us. She just likes to make sure things go okay. I looked over again. She smiled at me and gave a little wave. I didn't wave back. I asked him if this was something he did often, and he said, only for first dates, like that somehow made it better. She's very protective, he said. After what happened with my last relationship. He trailed off like I was supposed to ask. I didn't. I couldn't even focus on what he was saying after that. I just kept looking over at her, pretending I was checking the door or glancing at the pastries. She was still sitting there, still not reading, still tracking every move. Josh, meanwhile, was talking about his favorite podcasts like nothing was weird. I asked him again, you don't think this is strange? He said, "Not really. I mean, she's not intruding. She just likes to see who I'm spending time with." I asked, "And does she always report back afterward?" He laughed and said, "Only if I asked." But the way he said it made me think he always asked. He told me I seemed very composed and that his mom would probably like me. I said, "I don't need her to like me." He tilted his head and said, "She's a big part of my life." I said, "That's fine, but she shouldn't be part of this." It was like he couldn't see the line, or maybe the line never existed for him. We wrapped up pretty quickly after that. I said I had to get home, and he offered to walk me to my car. I said I was fine. As I stood up, his mom stood too. She gave me another wave, more of a nod this time, like she was giving me a passing grade. Outside, Josh said he had a great time and would love to see me again. I said, "I don't think I'm the right fit for this dynamic." He said, "That's okay. Most people don't understand at first." I said, "I'm not most people. I just think you need some space." He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, like there would always be someone else who did understand. Maybe he's right. Later that night, he messaged me. Said his mom thought I seemed smart and thoughtful. I didn't respond. There wasn't really anything left to say. I told my friend about it, and she asked if I was being too harsh. Maybe. But there's something so off about someone who's old enough to date, drive, live on their own, and still needs a parent watching from the sidelines like it's middle school soccer tryouts. I wasn't mad. I wasn't even freaked out. I was just done. There's a difference between being close to your family and not knowing where your family ends and you begin. If you can't go on a first date without backup, you're not ready to be in a relationship. You're still being supervised. You're still auditioning for someone else's approval. And I don't date people who need permission slips to talk to me. There's awkward, and then there's realizing halfway through dinner that the guy across from you brought his own food in a plastic container and doesn't believe in tipping because he thinks service work isn't real labor. That was Ben. And if I could have left the second he pulled that container out of his backpack, I would have. But I was too stunned. It didn't feel like a date. It felt like I'd accidentally walked into some kind of low-budget social experiment. We met on an app. His profile said he was into minimalism, ethical living, and had a dog named Miso. He didn't have any shirtless gym selfies or blurry group shots, which already made him stand out. His first message wasn't just, "Hey," it was a full paragraph about the philosophy of travel versus tourism. It was interesting in that way where you're not sure if someone's deep or just deeply annoying. I took the risk. We planned dinner at a vegetarian place that I've been meaning to try anyway. It was small, quiet, with handwritten chalkboard menus and weird indie music playing in the background. I showed up a few minutes early. He arrived right on time, wearing a linen button-up and carrying this oversized canvas tote. He looked exactly like his photos, just slightly more intense in person. His handshake was weirdly firm, and he said, "I don't do hugs on first meetings," like I tried to hug him, which I hadn't. We sat down, got the menu, and I asked what he was thinking of ordering. That's when he said, "Oh, I brought my own meal. I hope that's okay." I thought he was joking. I laughed and said, "Wait, really?" He nodded and started unpacking it right there at the table. A glass container with what looked like quinoa roasted vegetables and a homemade dressing in a mason jar. I asked why, and he said, "I don't believe in giving money to places that overcharge for wellness." I said, "But you agreed to come here." He said, "I like the ambience. I just don't support the model." Then he pulled a bamboo fork out of his bag and started eating like this was completely normal behavior. The server came over and asked if we were ready to order. I ordered something small because now I felt awkward being the only one eating from the restaurant. She looked at his Tupperware and didn't say anything, just gave this tight smile and walked away. I whispered, "You're allowed to bring your own food here." And he said, "They don't like it. They can't stop me. That's the beauty of loopholes." I already wanted to leave. He asked if I'd ever read this long blog post about the dangers of the restaurant industry. I said no, and he offered to send it to me later. He said, "Eating out is one of the least ethical things people do without thinking." I said, "Even at places like this?" He said, "Especially places like this. They prey on guilt to justify inflated prices." Then, mid-bite, he launched into a full speech about how tipping creates imbalance in labor dynamics and how he never tips anyone, anywhere. not baristas, not delivery drivers, not servers. I said, "You don't tip at all." He shook his head. "I don't believe in rewarding people for jobs they chose." I said, "So you think no one deserves extra for good service?" He said, "I think if the job requires tipping to survive, it shouldn't exist." I looked at him for a second, then looked around the restaurant, thinking about the server who was now very clearly avoiding our table. I said, "You realize people rely on tips just to pay rent, right?" He said, "That's not my problem. That's a broken system. I'm not going to fund a broken system." I didn't even know what to say to that. I asked, "So what do you do for work?" And he said he does consulting for lifestyle alignment. I asked what that meant, and he said, "I help people restructure their routines so they can live more efficiently with less." I asked if people actually paid him for that. He said, "You'd be surprised how many people need help doing what I do naturally." He spent the next 10 minutes explaining his morning routine in excruciating detail. It involved cold showers, yoga, meditation, journaling, and something called mouth taping. I nodded through it while trying to focus on my food. He didn't ask a single thing about me, just kept going. When the server came back with the check, I reached for my wallet and he stopped me, said, "I'll cover yours since I used the space." I said, "Thanks," hoping that would be the end of it. Then I watched him write a big 0 in the tip line and draw a smiley face next to it. I said, "You really didn't want to leave anything?" And he said, "Leaving a tip would make me a hypocrite." I was so ready to be done. We stood up and he packed up his container, rinsed it in the bathroom sink, and stuffed it back in his tote. As we walked out, he said, "I had a great time. You got really centered energy." I said, "Thanks, because what else do you say to that?" He asked if I wanted to go for a walk. I said I had to be up early. He said, "Totally get it. Sleep's one of the most undervalued aspects of health." I didn't say anything, just kept walking toward my car. He texted me the next day, sent the link to the blog post, a screenshot of some study on tipping culture, and a voice note that started with, "Here's something I didn't get to say last night." I didn't open any of it. I didn't block him. I just let the silence do what it needed to do. The worst part wasn't the food or the weird job or even the tipping thing. It was how proud he was of it all. Like he figured out some hidden truth the rest of us were too blind to see. Like his lack of generosity made him more evolved. Maybe he thought I'd admire him for not conforming. Maybe he thought I'd be impressed that he refused to participate in what he called performative gratitude. But really, I just kept thinking about the server. Oh, how she had to stand there smiling, while some guy ate homemade quinoa from a container and talked about dismantling her paycheck. And I don't care how ethically sourced your dressing is. If you can't respect the people serving you, you're not interesting. You're just a jerk with a mason jar. You ever go on a date with someone who seems like they're not even really there for you? Like they're sitting across from you, smiling, talking, but deep down you can tell they're just waiting for someone else to show up. That's what it felt like with Ashley, except the person she was waiting for was herself. Or, more specifically, the version of herself she thought I wanted. It started off normal. We matched on a Sunday night, both complaining about how weekends go too fast and how dating apps are exhausting. Her profile was simple but cute. A couple selfies, a blurry concert pic, and one of her on a beach holding a coconut. Her bio said, "Recovering overthinker. Will probably psychoanalyze your Spotify." I thought that was funny. Her messages were even better. Snappy, smart, not trying too hard. She actually asked questions, which already put her ahead of most people. We planned to meet at this quiet rooftop bar that does small plates and has a view of the city. It was one of those places that looks fancy but still lets you wear sneakers. I got there first. She walked in about 5 minutes later wearing a dress that looked like it belonged at a gala. Hair done, makeup flawless, heels way too high for the amount of walking I knew she was about to do. I stood up and said hey, that she gave me this huge smile like we'd already known each other for years. We sat down, ordered drinks, and started talking. Right away, I could tell something was off. Not in a scary way. More like she was performing. Every sentence felt like a line she'd rehearsed in front of a mirror. Every laugh was a half second too late. I'd ask her something casual, like what she liked to do on weekends, and she'd give me these answers that sounded weirdly curated. Like, I love hiking at sunrise with my rescue dog while listening to obscure indie playlists that match the mood of the mountain. I asked what kind of dog, and she blinked, then said, "She's a mixed breed." It felt like she was making it up as she went. I figured maybe it was nerves. First dates are weird. People overcompensate, so I try to lighten the mood. Told her a dumb story about how I once got kicked out of a karaoke bar for singing too loud. She laughed, but it didn't feel real. It felt like someone mimicking laughter because they think that's what they're supposed to do. She asked a lot of questions about me, which I appreciated at first, but they were oddly specific. Like, what's your biggest emotional weakness? Or what would your ex say is your biggest flaw? I answered as best I could, but then she started echoing my responses in this weird way. I said I tend to bottle things up until I explode, and she nodded like she knew it already. Then she said, "Me too, exactly that." I said I struggle with overcommitting, and she said, "Wow, I'm literally the same." After a while, it stopped feeling like a connection and it started feeling like a mirror. At one point, I made a dumb comment about how I don't really like seafood, and she said, "Neither do I." Then the waiter came and she ordered scallops. I asked, "I thought you didn't like seafood." And she smiled and said, "Oh, I make an exception for these." Everything she did felt like it was based on what she thought I'd like. If I said I liked low-key nights, and she said she loved those too. If I mentioned a movie, she'd say she'd just watched it, even if I'd literally made it up. Yeah, I tested it. I said I'd just rewatched an old black and white French film I made up on the spot. She said, "That's one of my favorites." That's when I knew. She wasn't being herself. She was being a version of someone she thought I'd be into. I asked her directly, "What do you actually like? Not what do you think I like?" She paused, blinked a few times, then said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You keep agreeing with everything I say, even when it contradicts something you just said. It's okay to be different from me." She got quiet, looked down at her drink. Then she said, "I just really want this to go well." And I get that, I really do. Dating sucks. People lie, ghost, waste your time. So when you find someone who seems decent, it makes sense that you'd want to match their energy. But this wasn't matching energy. This was pretending to be someone else. I told her, "You don't have to be perfect for me to like you. Just be real." She smiled again, but it wasn't big this time. Just soft. Tired, maybe. After that, the tone shifted. She admitted she didn't actually like hiking. Said the dress she wore wasn't even hers, it was her roommate's. Said she didn't have a dog, just borrowed one for a photo. I didn't say anything. I just listened. She told me she'd get on a bunch of bad dates and felt like people only liked her when she was exactly what they were looking for. So she got good at figuring out what that was. Said she could usually tell within the first 10 minutes what kind of girl a guy wanted and just became that. I asked, "Does it work?" And she said, "Not really, but it feels safer than being myself and getting rejected for it." I didn't know what to say to that. We didn't stay much longer after that. We split the bill, walked down the stairs together. She said, "Thanks for not being weird about all this." I said, "Thanks for being honest." Eventually, we hugged. It was quick and polite. She said, "I'll probably disappear now." And I said, "Okay." And she did. Never heard from her again. Part of me wanted to message her. Tell her she didn't need to do all that. That she was probably interesting enough just being herself. But I didn't, because I didn't know who that was. I only met the version she thought I wanted. So yeah, that was Ashley. A girl who showed up dressed like a stranger and left before I ever got to meet her for real. Dating's hard when everyone's pretending. Harder when you finally notice. There's awkward, and then there's trying to make small talk with someone who's actively trying to convert you to their religion over a plate of fries. And not in a chill, this is what I believe kind of way. I mean, full on, pre planned, rehearsed speech with printed materials. That was my date with Chloe. She didn't just bring her personality, she brought a mission. And I didn't know I was a target until it was too late to leave without making a scene. We matched on an app where she seemed normal. Cute smile, a few hiking pics, one of her at a bookstore. Her bio said she loved deep conversations and meaningful community, which honestly sounded like the usual dating profile filler. I figured she was maybe just a little introverted or serious. I like that. She asked thoughtful questions. We talked about favorite books, weird dreams, how we both hate voice notes, but send them anyway when we're tired of typing. She suggested grabbing food at this diner that was halfway between our places. I liked that it wasn't some fake fancy wine bar or a coffee shop trying to sell $12 toast. It was the kind of place where the menus were sticky and everything came with a pickle, and I figured that meant she was down to earth. I didn't know that was the only part of her that wasn't curated. She showed up around time wearing this long skirt, button-up shirt, and the kind of smile that felt almost too rehearsed, like a teacher on parent-teacher night. She sat down, complimented my jacket, and launched straight into conversation like she didn't want there to be a single moment of silence. I thought she was just nervous. Now I realized she was stalling, buying time before the real topic started. We ordered burgers, fries, milkshakes, the usual comfort food, and for the first 10 minutes it was fine. She told me she was an English tutor. I told her I worked in digital design. We talked about our families where we grew up, childhood TV shows. Normal first date chatter. Then she asked, "What's your spiritual background?" It caught me a little off guard, but I said, "Not really religious. Grew up kind of neutral. I believe in being a decent person. That's about it." She smiled like I had just confirmed something she already knew. Then she said, "That's okay. Everyone starts somewhere." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I just nodded and took a sip of my shake. Then she pulled a little booklet out of her bag and slid it across the table. I looked down. It had a doe on the cover and a title about rediscovering truth or something equally vague. I said, "What's this?" And she said, "It's just something I like to share with people I meet. It helped me a lot, and I thought it might speak to you." I blinked, then asked, "Did you bring this just for me?" She said, "I bring them everywhere. You never know who's ready to hear it." That's when it hit me. This wasn't a date. This was a pitch. A recruitment. I wasn't here because she liked me. I was here because she thought I was impressionable. I said, "I'm not really interested in converting to anything." She said, "It's not about conversion. It's about opening your heart to what's already true." Then she started flipping through the booklet like a teacher going through a lesson plan. She pointed at sections, told me stories, quoted lines that clearly meant a lot to her, but to me just sounded rehearsed. I tried to steer the conversation back to anything else. Asked her about her job again, what she did for fun, if she watched anything good recently. She answered quickly, then circled back to the booklet. Said she felt called to bring it into conversations. I said, "Even on dates?" And she said, "Especially on dates." I wasn't mad, not yet, just confused. I asked, "So was this your plan from the start?" She didn't hesitate. Not a plan, a purpose. Then she asked me if I'd ever felt lost, if I'd ever gone through something hard and wondered what it all meant. I said, "Of course. I think everyone has." She nodded like I was falling into her net. Said, "That's where it begins. That little emptiness you can't explain. That's your soul asking for direction." I said, "Or it's just life being hard sometimes." She smiled again. "Or maybe you're finally ready to be found." I put the booklet down and pushed it gently back across the table. I said, "I appreciate that this means something to you, but I didn't come here to be preached to." She said, "This isn't preaching, it's connection." I said, "It feels more like pressure." She looked genuinely surprised, like I missed the point, like I was the one being closed off. Then she said the line that stuck with me. "I just don't want to see someone with potential wander through life without truth." I said, "And you think you get to decide what that truth is?" She didn't answer. We finished the meal mostly in silence. She didn't bring it up again. I didn't ask her any more questions. The check came, and we split it. As we walked out, she said, "I hope something in that booklet speaks to you eventually." I said, "I hope next time you meet someone, you give them a choice." She didn't respond, just smiled that same soft smile and walked to her car. Later that night, she messaged me a paragraph thanking me for being open and said she'd pray for my heart to be softened. I didn't reply. I don't care what people believe. I really don't. You want to follow a religion? Meditate with crystals, manifest under the moon, go for it. But don't disguise it as a date. Don't pretend you're here to get to know me when really you're just looking for someone new to sit through your script. Belief is personal. So is dating. And if you bring pamphlets to both, you're probably missing the point of each.